Welcome back to Sakimas Homestead. I'm Brian, and today we're back in the garage. As you can see, we're working on the 2000 F350 7.3 diesel. Today's issue I can only describe as massive oil consumption. So come along, I'll tell you how we got to this point and what I'm planning on doing to try and fix this issue. Hello, and welcome to our channel. We're glad you're here. I want to apologize up front for background noise. We're in the garage. We've got peacocks overhead. We've got sheep over here in the stall, so there might be some animal background noises. That scratching sound, the peacocks are running around up on the rafters. Anyway, this is Memorial Day weekend, 2019, on Saturday. 2 weeks ago on Tuesday, I drove the truck to work. It drove fine. I went to leave work, and it was running rough, stalling, had trouble getting out of the parking lot. I put fuel in it. I had trouble starting it after I put fuel in it, but it did seem to smooth out some. I drove it about 15 miles. My drive to and from work is 50. At about 15 miles, I was on a like a rolling hill road, just the nice little up and down hills. And I noticed when I started going up the hills, I would lose a little bit of power, and then it would smooth back out, and it kept getting a little worse and a little worse. And there's a reservoir on that road that has like a little boat marina where you can launch a boat or rent a boat. So I thought, well, it's a good place. I can pull in this parking lot. I'm off the street. It should be easy for a tow truck to find. I went ahead and called for a tow truck. Sat there for probably half an hour or so with the truck idling. It seemed to be okay, but I didn't want to push my luck. At the half hour or so point, it started to idle rougher. And I was worried that where I was parked, I was in a parking space. I didn't know if they were going to tow me from the front or the back, so I thought, while it's still running, I better back up and park sideways so they can get me from the front or the back, which I did do. Backed up okay. When I put it in drive to go forward, it stalled again. And when it stalled that time, it did not want to restart. I would crank and crank longer than I probably should have. Sometimes it would start. If I gave it a little bit of throttle, it would run until I took my foot off the throttle, and then it would just die again. One time when I did that, I noticed that as it would die, the oil pressure gauge would drop. So I happened to have my laptop with me. I think I may have been editing a video, so I took it to work with me. I've got the ForeScan tool on my laptop, so I went ahead and plugged into the truck and checked, and I don't recall the code number. It was like 211 or something like that, but basically it was the high pressure oil IPC pressure low. So I knew I didn't have enough pressure to run the injectors. Waited for the tow truck, got towed home. In the morning I pulled the dipstick out and it was dry. I put a gallon of oil in it, checked it again, still dry. Put a second gallon of oil in it, and it was barely on the tip of the dipstick. So I was down massive amounts of oil. The truck really, for the most part, doesn't leak oil. It does a little bit out of the adapter for the dipstick on the side of the oil pan, which is a common issue on these, but definitely not 2 to 3 quarts worth of oil, because the bottom of the truck's dry. If I was leaking that much oil, it'd be oil streaked the whole way back. So I brought the truck in, did a little forum research, and it said either an injector O-ring or the turbo. It's about the 2 ways you can lose that much oil in that quick of a time. When I took my intercooler tubes off, they were full of oil. So I figured, okay, it's got to be the turbo. Called around, I found one that O'Reilly's was able to order me for the next day. I put that turbo on, drove the truck to work Friday and back home, and of course I'd added another gallon of oil after I put the turbo in to fill it up, so I had lost 3 gallons of my 4 gallons of oil. Drove it to work and back, which is, like I said, 50 miles one way, so it's 100 miles. I checked it before I left work. I don't remember if it was down, if I added any or not. I think it may have only been down like about a half a quart or a quart. So I drove it home, which said would be a 100-mile round trip. Drove it to town twice on Saturday, which would be last Saturday, which is less than 10 miles round trip. So at 120 miles, That's all I drove it. Didn't drive it at all Sunday. We did buy more oil Sunday because I was out. That's why I didn't add any before I left work on Friday, because every drop I had I'd put in it. I checked it Monday morning before I went to work, put another 2.5 gallons of oil in it. So in 120 miles I'd lost 2.5 gallons of oil. Drove it to work, like I said, Monday. Went to leave work. I checked it before I left. It was down at the bottom of the stick. So I added another gallon at work, which put it better. It was still low, but it was at least way up on the stick in the hash mark area. Haven't bothered checking it at this point because it doesn't matter. Drove it home Monday, and at the cost of oil for this truck at 20 something a gallon, it was cheaper for me to rent a car to drive to work this week than it was to drive this truck and try and keep oil in it, possibly do damage. So it's been sitting here. I've done some more work on it off camera. I've done some disassembly work. The intercooler tubes did have oil in them again, so I did have O'Reilly's warranty the turbo. I don't know if it's actually bad or not, but I was in there. It's a lifetime warranty. I went ahead and got another one. The other thing they say is if your oil filter is black, it's because your injector seal or O-rings are bad and you're pushing oil into the fuel side. About 2,000 miles ago, I did an oil change and fuel filter change on the truck, and the oil filter was black. I pulled this one out the other day and checked it, and the fuel filter with 2,000 miles on it is black again. So I've got an O-ring issue on the injectors. So what we're going to do today is put new O-rings on the injectors and go ahead and throw another turbo on it. Like I said, it's a lifetime warranty. I'll throw another one on while I'm in here just to be safe. Put it all back together and see what happens. Like I said, I've already done most of the disassembly work. I will put an injector back in and show you how to pull those out. And we'll do the O-ring change on camera and at least put one back in on camera, and I'll kind of explain, how to get to that point and what to do. So it's enough of me ranting along. Let's turn the camera around and show you down inside the truck. Okay, we'll cover the injectors first. We'll talk about the turbo later. First thing I did is took out the battery and the air cleaner box, the intercooler tubes. You need to take the main wiring harness that goes from the fender to the truck, break it in half. When you take the valve cover off this side, there's two studs that hold the plug down on. I took the valve cover gaskets off because you end up prying against this surface to pull the injectors out. That plug is for the injector harness. One reason I and a lot of people hate Dorman products. These valve covers I replaced a while back on a different video. I can link that up in the corner. This is a replacement plug that comes with the Dorman gaskets. The other side, I didn't have to change the plug. It was in good shape. The factory plug plugs in and out of the Dorman gasket, no problem at all. This is the Dorman plug that came with the Dorman valve cover gaskets, and the clips that hold it in are too big. Their own plug does not fit in their own gasket. You have to pry and twist and jam a screwdriver down in there to get this plug out of their own gasket. I could understand an OEM plug not fitting an aftermarket gasket, but a plug that comes with a gasket that doesn't fit in the gasket it comes with is why people do not like Dorman products. They are, pardon the French, they are junk for the most part. Rant over, let's get back to the job here. The turbo is out of the way. You don't have to do any of the turbo to get to the valve covers. This valve cover is easier. You take, like I said, the harness off, and the tube that goes from the air cleaner to the turbo inlet has to come off. It has the CCV in it. And then you just take your bolts off and it comes off. One tip, this bolt here is underneath the CCV. If you don't want to have to buy O-rings for the CCV, you use a wrench to get underneath it to get that particular bolt out. The rest of them you can use a socket. Okay, over here on the passenger side, it's a little bit tighter. The one front bolt down here has the dipstick tube attached to it, so you have to take that loose first and lift the dipstick tube bracket up off, and then take that bolt out. The heater hoses just kind of push back out of the way. You need to remove the map sensor off the bracket here that's on top of the air conditioner. A lot of people say you do not have to remove the air conditioner compressor to get the valve cover out, but for the 4 bolts it takes and to pop the belt off, it makes it way easier. So I always just loosen it up, basically. Take the bolts out, take the belt off so you can move it out of the way. Then that valve cover comes up out of there. So let me stick one of these injectors back in, and I'll show you the procedure to remove the injectors, and then we will take a look at the O-rings on them. Okay, I'll try and explain this to you the best I can, hanging upside down here and with the poor lighting in this garage. Before you remove your injectors, you've got these 2 little plugs that are in the top of the head. One is located here between injectors, or between cylinders 2 and 4, and one is located back here between 6 and 8. They take an 1/8 inch Allen wrench to get out. You've got this tiny little Allen plug on them and an O-ring that seals. You remove these 2 plugs if at all possible, and if you can only get one out because one strips, you'll need to remove one of these plugs on top of the head to allow air to go in. This will allow a lot of the oil that is in the top of the head in this oil passage to drain out. If you pull the injectors out without removing those plugs, you're going to flood your cylinders with oil, and you can do rod damage or piston damage when you try and start the truck up because they'll hydraulic on that oil. You'll need to try and vacuum it out if that happens, but it's best practice to remove those 2 little plugs and let the oil drain before you pull the injectors to eliminate the amount of oil you get down inside. Now on the injector itself, we'll use this one for an example since it's already out. You've got this plate underneath, that's what holds it down. There is this little oil passage which is attached to the front corner of the bracket. You want to remove all these little oil passages. This is what keeps the oil that sprays out of the injector. It directs it down instead of spraying out. That's how you can run these vehicles without the valve covers on for diagnostics. Just got an Allen head in it. You remove all 8 of these. And then there's 2 bolts that hold this bracket down. The top bolt you do not have to work. It is shouldered into the head, and it is more of a pivot point. You don't want to loosen that up at all. The back bolt back here is just an 8mm head bolt. Remove that, and once you remove it, you can take this bracket and push it forward on the head. That will kind of release it. Once you push that forward, you stick a pry bar under the front and pry up and pop your injector out. So I'll show you that on the one that's still in the truck. You just take your bracket, you push it forward, and that releases it from this front pivot bolt. Then you just take your pry bar, stick it underneath that bracket, and this is why you don't want your valve cover gasket in, because you're prying on this top of the head, and you just pry up and drop your injector on the floor because it popped out so easy. There's one for the blooper reel. So anyway, that's how you pop them out. And since this one's been in and out, it came out a lot easier than it should have. Usually they kind of pop, and I would have normally had my hand over it to catch it, but I was trying to keep it open so you guys could see. So that's how you get your injectors out. So now that the injectors are out, we will take the camera over to the bench and show you the O-ring change. We've got all 8 injectors here on the bench. The O-ring kit comes with the crush washer, copper washer for the tip, the orange washer or O-ring that goes at the bottom of the fuel area, the pink O-ring that goes in between the fuel and the oil, and a 3-ring set for the top of the oil. There's a round O-ring, a square O-ring, and a little metal backer ring. It goes metal, square, round from the top down. This O-ring came off of injector number 1. I think you can see the the worn area here, the chunk missing out of it, this would have been facing down. That was the underside of the O-ring. I'm hoping this was where my leak was coming from. On injector number 3, this debris was in the injector, like in the oil passage area at the pink O-ring. It almost looks like a leaf, or maybe one of those maple seed, like little helicopter things, because it's got a rigid section and then like almost like a veiny area that resembles one of those little helicopter areas. Now, I don't know if this was inside the head and when I pulled the injector out it stuck to the side of it, or if this was actually down inside the injector this whole time. I'll never know the answer to that. But one thing that has changed, before I had this issue, whenever I'd run a cylinder compensation test, cylinder 3 would always fail. Monday, after I put the turbo in and I cleared all the codes out before I drove it to work on Monday, I did a cylinder compensation test and it passed 100%. So I don't know if this stuff may have been in there and partially clogging the number 3 injector, and the loss of oil, gain of oil, pressure differential that I was going through broke pieces off and it flowed through. I don't know. But like I said, the injector number 3 passed the test, which it has never done before. So that's just kind of an interesting thing to note. Now, to change these O-rings, need to get this copper crush washer off. I'm just going to use a big pair of pliers with a peacock feather stuck to them. Big pair of pliers here. Just squeeze this O-ring from the sides, give it a little twist, and it's walking right off of there. Before I put this back together, I'm going to hit all these injector tips with a wire wheel just to clean all that carbon off. And you take an O-ring pick, just get underneath your orange O-ring, walk it right off of there. Go to your pink O-ring, do the same thing. And we'll install these the same way, just being careful not to damage the O-rings. There we go, pink one's off. And move it to our black rings. Walk the round O-ring off first. Then the square O-ring. Now these top O-rings can fail as well, which can give you a hard start condition because it's pushing your oil up into your valve cover instead of into the injector. And then we'll take our metal ring, pop our metal ring off the same way, kind of just like walking a piston ring off of a piston. Okay, the rings are all off. I'll do that to all these injectors. I'll get them all cleaned up. Like I said, wire wheel the end of these to get this carbon off. Well, I just cannot, oh there we go, just cannot find that lens from this angle. And we'll start putting it back together. Now, one thing I've noted, my new O-rings, this is a solid orange O-ring. I would guess if I cut this O-ring in half, it would be orange all the way through. Same thing with the pink one. The O-rings I've taken off look to be some kind of a cheap aftermarket that are a black O-ring that have been painted orange and have been painted pink on one side. So I'm wondering if these, I know the injectors were replaced by the previous owner, so I don't know if this might be like a Dorman set of O-rings or what they are, but they're definitely not the factory style O-rings. And that may be contributing to this issue as well. So let me get all these O-rings off and get these injectors cleaned up, and I'll show you how to put the new O-rings on. Okay, I just wiped them all down real well. I ended up not using the wire wheel on the tips. Most of the carbon came off when I pulled the little copper rings off, so I didn't feel it necessary to clean those up with a wire wheel. I'm using the Alliant Power O-rings. From what my research showed, they are the closest thing to stock, if not the stock O-ring from Motorcraft. So we're hoping they're a good quality. Before I put the O-rings on, I wipe the grooves out one more time, make sure we don't have any debris in there. Take your steel ring or metal ring, walk it up into the groove. It goes in pretty easy. Then you take your square O-ring, which has little paint dots on it. Those are to help ensure that it doesn't roll over. Paint dot should remain out. Take your pick, walk your square O-ring up till it's in the groove. Go around it with the pick to make sure it hasn't rolled. Make sure your little paint dots are still up. Get your round O-ring, which is actually kind of a little bit of a purple color. Stick the round O-ring on. Walk it up to the top. Again, roll the pick around and make sure you're not rolled. Now this pink one's a little tough. It's a harder material, and I'm not sure if you can see or not, but there's almost like a little ledge or a little lip inside of the seal. So you stick that one on. It's on there pretty tight. You basically have to walk it up onto this surface right before the groove and then drop it in the groove. It takes a little bit of work and a little bit of muscle to get it up on that ledge like that, and then you just keep walking it until it drops in the groove. Make sure it's not rolled, and it's loose right now, but as it sits for a few minutes it'll shrink back down and become tight again. Same thing with the orange one. Stick it on the end, walk it up in the groove. Make sure it's not rolled, and we're good to go on those. Now the copper ring has got like a crimp in it. This side has a groove, this side has like a hump. I've been putting the hump side down onto the injector and the groove side away from it. According to the Ford manual, it doesn't matter which way you do it, but that's how I did it and just kept it consistent with all the O-ring or with all the injectors. You just use a 8mm or 15/16 deep well socket to just shove that copper ring right down on there. And you want to check them and make sure they're tight and they're not going to fall off, because you don't want that falling off during assembly. So let's move these injectors over to the truck and I'll show you how to put them in. I am going to use a little bit of Vaseline on all the O-rings to help them slide in there better. I've always used Vaseline as an assembly lube on engines and I've never had a problem with it. But I'm sure there might be a better product out there for that. So let's move these over to the truck and I'll show you how to install these. Okay, we're going to start here with the number 2. It's probably the easiest one to get to for you to see. I've already taken a paper towel, stuffed it down inside the hole, and used a long 1/4-inch extension to kind of wipe it around in there to get it cleaned out. So we'll take our injector. We've already put a liberal coating of petroleum jelly on all 3 O-ring surfaces. It goes in this direction with the plug up and this hole, threaded hole in the keeper plate up. Stick it down in the hole, keeping the keeper plate pushed forward so that it drops down over the bolt. Just tap it in a little bit by hand until the keeper plate will drop underneath the bolt that we did not remove in the head. Then you can take a 5/8 wrench, which fits on the keeper plate, and just use the 5/8 wrench to push the injector down until it seats. Then we can take our bolt, stick our bolt in there, get it started, and we want to torque that to 120 inch-pounds. We'll set our torque wrench to 120 inch-pounds. Tighten that up. Till it clicks. Right there. And then we'll take our little oil diverter, stick it back in the front of the injector underneath the electrical plug. Try and find where I put the Allen wrenches. I am using a, can't quite read it, 3/16 Allen wrench. Tighten that back up. And then we can move on to the other injectors. Now I have also removed the glow plugs and have purchased new glow plugs to put in the truck. And the reason I've removed them is when I get all these injectors in and tightened up, I will go back through probably twice and recheck the torque on them. And then the glow plug goes right down in this space here. I'm going to take a rag and stick a rag like that in each injector over the glow plug hole, and I'm going to slowly bump the engine over a few times and let it crank. And if there is any oil or diesel fuel that's leaked down into the cylinders, if I do it over slow, it should push it up out of the glow plug hole as a relief so that I don't damage my pistons or my connecting rods by hydraulic in the engine. So that'll be the theory. We'll see how it works. Let me go ahead and install the other 7 injectors. Then we can put the valve covers on. Now, install the other injectors, put these rags in, and run this engine over a few times to make sure all the oil is cleared out of the cylinders before we try and start this later. Then we can get back into reassembly. Now, all 8 injectors are back in. All the hold down bolts have been torqued a couple times to make sure they're at the right torque. The little oil diverter spouts are attached on all of them and torqued. And all 4 of the little plugs that go in the head for the oil drain are back in and tightened. Got the rags stuffed in there over top of the glow plug holes, and I'm ready to start cranking this over. And I realized without the turbo on there, I'm going to be blowing oil all over the back of the engine. So I need to put the turbo in. I'm just going to bring you over and show you kind of how it works, because as tight as it is back there, there's virtually no way I can actually show doing it. But I'll bring the camera up in here and show you where it goes and what where the bolts are at and so forth. Okay, the turbo sits right in this area here. This 2 O-rings back here. This side is the oil supply. This is the oil return. There's a bolt here and a bolt here that bolts that pedestal down. And then up front here, there's a bolt there and a bolt over here that also hold the pedestal down. In the back, this is the up pipe coming from both manifolds. This attaches to the back of the turbo with this clamp. And then this is the down pipe that goes to the exhaust. It attaches with this clamp. So I'll take you over to the turbo and kind of show you the PC parts over there. Okay, this is the new turbo on the bench. These are the 2 front bolt holes for the pedestal. And these are the 2 rear bolt holes. Those oil galleys are right inside of here. They come up through the bottom of the, or the top of the pedestal and feed oil up into the turbo through here. It's possible, I suppose, to get this turbo in the truck as is, but it's really difficult to get to these two back bolts. So I take the top part of the turbo off of the pedestal to do that. So I have to take these two center bolts out. Normally these are 13 millimeter heads, but this rebuilt turbo, they're 15s for some reason. And then this little door here, I forget exactly what that's called, but it closes in the winter time to help create back pressure to heat the engine up. This is the actuator rod for that. There's a little clip here that holds these together. You have to pop that clip out so these will split. I'll just lift this turbo off. Okay, there's the pedestal itself. This is the actuator rod for that little door I showed you. This solenoid is what actuates an oil passage, which actuates this rod. So the two, I get that rag off of there. There's the two holes that meet up with the block, and then your supply and your return, these feed up into the turbo. So I'll take this pedestal and mount it in the truck, and then I'll set this turbo unit on top of the pedestal, tighten the two bolts down, and also reattach this clip, which is a real nightmare because it's up underneath and real hard to get to. But I need to get all of that together, otherwise where this hole matches to the block down here, when I start cranking it, it's going to be blowing oil everywhere. So I'm going to get the turbo in there, and I'll show you maybe off and on as I go with the turbo, but like I said, it's so tight in there, it's really not going to be much to see. Okay, there's the pedestal in and attached. One hold down bolt here, one behind this air tube, and then the two in the back. And it takes a swivel and an extension on a 10 millimeter socket and a close personal friend at Ford to be able to get in there to tighten those and loosen those bolts up as is, because they're kind of underneath this up pipe. So I can't even imagine how you would get to those with the turbo unit on top of here. So that's why I split the unit. So now I'll bring the main turbo unit in, slide it down in here, drop the actuator, or that little door into this actuator arm, put these two bolts in, tighten that down, and put that clip on. Then we're sealed up oil-wise, and we can go ahead and crank this thing over. I'll worry about doing the pipes later. And there's the turbo attached. Got both these center bolts tightened. I got the clip way up underneath there back on. This is the up pipe where it connects, or the down pipe rather. I'll need to bring this clamp up and tighten that flange together. And of course you can't see it at all, but the up pipe comes in on the other side of this round section. Got the same type of clamp here. I'll need to clamp that on there. And then the turbo will be done. But for right now, it's on there. The oil passages are closed up, so we can go ahead and crank this over and evacuate any oil or fuel that's in these cylinders before we put the glow plugs in. Okay, you saw that better than I did. I saw we at least blew one of these out of there, blew one out on the other side. So that should be enough to evacuate all the oil and fuel out of there. Nothing's hooked up electrically, so there's no way we should have gotten fuel or oil out of the injectors in there because they're not even hooked up yet. So we'll go ahead and put our glow plugs in. They'll just drop down in there and get tightened up. I think they were 97 inch-pounds. No, the glow plugs are 124 inch-pounds. The valve covers are 97. So I'll get all these rags cleaned up that blew out, and we will start putting this together. There's the 8 new glow plugs. These are Motorcraft. I'll just drop down in that hole next to the injectors on all 8 cylinders. And I'll take a 10 millimeter deep socket, thread those down in, and torque them to 124 inch-pounds. Alright, with the glow plugs in and torque down, it's time to put the valve cover gaskets on. You just have connections in there that hook to your injectors and drop down and plug into the 4 glow plugs. So I'll put the valve cover gaskets on, put the harnesses on, go ahead and put the valve covers on, and then we can start putting brackets and the wiring harness and hook the 2 exhaust pipes up to the turbo. There's a Y section that goes in front of the turbo that feeds to the intercooler tube and then from the intercooler tube into the engine. To put that on there, it's got a clamp similar to the other 2, and we'll get this thing all buttoned up, put the belt back on it, and see how it runs. Won't know for sure if I've fixed my oil leak until I drive it for a while, unfortunately, but with the new O-rings and another new turbo, I can't see how it could possibly still be leaking. So let me get the valve covers back on and all the pipes and all that stuff, and we will see if it runs. Alright, everything's back together except for the air cleaner and tube. That's not needed right now. I do have this intercooler hose loose at the turbo. Whenever you have a potential turbo issue that has put oil into the system, there's always a chance that the bottom of the intercooler is full of oil, and when you start it up, it can start sucking that oil out of the intercooler, actually run on the oil. You shut the key off and it'll stay running and it'll run away. So you want to be able to yank this tube off, and I've got a little square piece of wood over here. I can close that off to stop the airflow, or it'll just run away and blow the vehicle up. So you always want to, if you've had a turbo issue that you think you may have some oil in there, you always want that option available so you don't get a runaway diesel and blow things up. I've already had it running. It scared me to death because I had to crank it forever for it to start. I actually ran the batteries down. I'm assuming that I had to refill the passageways in the heads with oil to get them to pressurize to run. I'm still having some longer crank times than usual. Might just be some bugs to work out, but it does start. It's been blowing quite a bit of smoke, so it's working that oil out. So let me fire it up and let you hear it run. So as you can see, it runs. You can notice that longer than normal cranking time. Usually it's 3 or 4 revolutions that it fires up, and now it takes 6-8 seconds to start. Part of that could be the batteries are low. That happened when I put the turbo on last time. I had the same starting issue, and once I drove it to work, after that it started fine. So I'm not too worried about that. It does have that loud chatter when it starts up. It's probably still low on oil as well. I've got to fix that dipstick tube down there, so I don't want to fill it up with oil, just have to drain it back out. But there's where we're at on the fuel injector O-ring replacement and swapping the turbo. If you have any questions or comments, please put them down below. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. Appreciate a thumbs up, and you have a wonderful day.